Let's try a second example where we take an equation in standard form and put it into vertex form by completing the square. Alright, in this case, I have a non-1 value for my a term. My a term is 4. It's positive. If my a term is positive, I know that my parabola is going to open up, and so it's going to have a minimum. I can tell that right away from the start. I don't need to do any work on it. I don't need to isolate anything. I don't need to complete the square. I know that f of x equals 4x squared minus 12x plus 3 definitely has a minimum. So I now know I'm not looking for a max. I'm looking for a min. I want to know what that minimum is. To do that, I'm going to complete the square. All right, so step 1, insert brackets around the first two terms. Easy. Took my equation, put brackets on it. Next step, I'm going to factor out this 4. When I factor out this 4, that means divide the first term by 4, and I've got to divide this negative 12 by 4. So factor out any value in front of the x squared, divide everything by that value. Divide by 4, I get 4 open bracket x squared minus 3x, close the bracket, plus 3. Step 3, take the middle term, my middle term, divide it by 2, and square it. Negative 3 divided by 2, nuts. Sorry about that. This is negative 3 over 2. Negative 3 over 2 squared, well, if I take this whole thing and square it, negative 3 squared is 9, and negative 2 squared is 4. Don't mind that. Put that into brackets. 9 over 4, got to add it and subtract it. Remember, we're adding and subtracting so that we're not actually changing the equation, we're just writing it in a slightly different way. Bring that last term out of the bracket, but you have to multiply. What I mean by multiply is that 4 has to multiply by that negative 9 over 4 term, which leaves me with negative 9, so let's make sure we get this right. Negative 9 over 4, I take that and I multiply by 4, I get negative 9. So that's what I write outside my bracket. Everything else has stayed in the bracket. The 4 does apply to all these. If I was doing expansion, I would do all of those, but that's not what I want to do. I want to keep the 4 outside. I want to keep this nice and clean inside. I'm going to combine constants, negative 9 plus 3, negative 6. I'm ready for my last step. I know that the final form is going to be f of x is going to be 4, there's going to be a bracket, there's going to be a squared, and it's going to be minus 6. So I've just brought that down, and I know this is squared. Well, why do I know this is squared? I'm completing the square. That was my whole point. What goes inside the bracket? This x, well, it's x squared. The square root of that is just x. This negative tells me that there's a negative sign in between here. I'm always looking at the negative here. I don't care that 3 is there. I only care about the negative. This last term, what's the square root of that term? Square root of 9, 3. Square root of 4, 2. My final answer is 4, open bracket, x minus 3 over 2, close bracket squared, minus 6. What does this tell me? Like I said before, I definitely have a minimum because my a value is positive. My minimum value is negative 6. So my minimum value is down below here. And when does that minimum happen? At positive 3 over 2. It's like 1.5. So I'm about here. My parabola looks something like that. All right. This function has a minimum value of negative 6. The coordinates of the vertex is 3 over 2 and 6. The last example we're going to do is example 3. Again, we're going to do the same steps as we've done the last 2 times. First thing that we do is put brackets around a function. We're going to put a bracket here, and we're going to put a bracket there. Second step is going to be to factor this term, this negative 2 over 3 term, out of the bracket. That means that this needs to get divided by 2 over 3, and this needs to get divided by 2 over 3. Dividing by 8 divided by 2 over 3 is a little awkward. You could pull out some old fraction knowledge and know that 8 divided by 2 over 3 is the same as 8 times, and you got to invert the fraction, so that's 3 over 2. So that's 8 times 3, 24 divided by 2, that's 12. If you really want to, trust your calculator, you could just trust your calculator to do it. Whatever. Figure out a way that works for you. Factor out a value in front of the x squared. I get negative 2 over 3 outside the bracket. Don't forget to write it down. X squared minus 12x. Why is it minus 12? I forgot the negative there. Negative. There we go. Plus 5. Take the middle term. Our middle term is negative 12. Divide by 2, 6. Square it, 36. Yep. The negatives are important. You should be keeping them. But in this case, since I know that I'm going to square it eventually, the negative doesn't really matter. Step 4. Put that 36, that answer we just got, into the bracket. So I add 36, and I subtract 36. Nice and easy. Next step. Take that last 36. I wanted to get it outside the bracket, which means I need to multiply it by negative 2 over 3. Multiplying it, so it's a negative times a negative, it's definitely going to be a positive, then it's going to end up being positive 24. Alright. Lastly, that positive 24, positive 5, those two can go together, 29. Alright, we're ready to factor. So, final answer, f of x equals negative 2 over 3. That's going to stay the same. We're going to have our bracket. It's going to be a squared. It's going to be plus 29. What's this going to be? We're going to take the x squared, and it's an x. It's going to be a negative 36. Square root is 6. So we're doing a square root of x squared and square root of 36. Makes sense. Negative 2 over 3, open bracket, x minus 6 squared, close bracket, squares on the outside, plus 29. What does that tell us? We have a maximum value, the maximum because our parabola opens down. Side face opens down, so it's got a maximum value of 29, and the coordinate of the vertex is, this tells us the coordinate is positive 6 and positive 29.